Greetings. Welcome to episode 5 of Indiana's Timeless Tales. The series currently comprises 5 books with the sixth and the final stages of production that tell the story of Indiana from prehistory until the end of the American Revolution. The podcast necessarily omits some information from the printed volume, so those interested in all the material, you can find it in the book Indiana's Timeless Tales, Prehistory to 1781. In this episode, you will hear a brief timeline of events in United States history leading up to the first European explorers to penetrate into Indiana. Colonial American Timeline. August the 3rd, 1492. Christopher Columbus set sail on his first voyage. 7 years of patient lobbying finally paid off for Christopher Columbus. On August the 3rd, 1492, he set out with 3 ships from Palos de la Frontera, Spain, on his first voyage of exploration. A new trade route. Columbus and the monarchs had signed the contract promising support for Columbus's voyage on April the 17th, 1492. The thrust of the voyage was to find a sea route to the spices and silks of the East Indies and China. All the nations of Europe coveted this trade, which Muslims had interrupted with their conquests in Asia Minor. These disruptions had made the old Silk Road dangerous and unstable. The route around the Horn of Africa was long and tedious. Columbus believed that a route straight across the ocean would lead to Asia. He was right, but he never dreamed there was a continent in the way. Once they signed the contract, Columbus bent to the task of organizing his voyage. The Spanish town of Palos de la Frontera would serve as a springboard for Columbus's historic voyage. Palos de la Frontera. King Alfonso XI of Castile granted Alonso Caro and his wife the land Palos would occupy in 1322. Paleolithic, Tartessian, Roman, Visigothic, and Muslim peoples may have occupied the site previously. The inhabitants of the town were mostly fishermen. Queen Isabella required the inhabitants to contribute to Columbus's effort. The men involved: Martin Alonso Pinzon and his younger brother Vicente Yanez Pinzon assisted Columbus. Martin would command the Pinta and Vicente would command the Nina. Columbus would captain the Santa Maria. Juan Niño of Monguer owned the Nina, while Juan de la Casa owned the Santa Maria. Cristobal Quintero owned the Pinta that was nicknamed the Pint, the Look, or the Spotted One. Many members of the crew of the ships came from Palos and the surrounding area. The combined crews of the ships numbered 87. Masters and pilots were paid 2,000 maravedis per month. Able seamen received 1,000 maravedis per month. Ordinary seamen and ship's boys were paid 666 maravedis per month. At the time of Columbus's voyage, gold was worth 3,000 maravedis per ounce and silver 100. The ships. The Santa Maria was the largest of the 3 ships. Built in Pontevedra, Galicia, the ship was a type of ship called a carrack. A carrack is a 3 or 4-masted square-rigged ship used for longer voyage by the Spanish and Portuguese. The Santa Maria would have been about 58 feet long and about 100 tons. It would have been about 18 feet wide and drawn about 10 feet of water. The crew would have numbered about 40 sailors. Merchants typically used carracks for trade. The Pinta was a type of ship called a caravel, and it was Columbus's fastest ship. The Portuguese developed caravels in the 15th century. They were small, maneuverable, 2-masted ships used mainly for exploration. The Pinta was about 56 feet long, 17 feet wide, and about 70 tons. It had a draft of about 8 feet of water. The crew would have been about 26. The Nina was also a caravel, and its name was Spanish for little girl. The Nina became Columbus's favorite ship. It would have been about 50 feet long, 16 feet wide, and weighed about 60 tons. It had a draft of about 7 feet and carried a crew of 24. 3 months of planning. On the evening of August the 3rd, 1492, Christopher Columbus and his crew set off. It was on a voyage of major consequences. Spain and all of Europe would change completely because of the voyage. The natives of the new lands Columbus discovered would suffer major consequences as well. But on that evening long ago, the sailors were uncertain about their destination and their fates. However, their place in history was secure. July 29th, 1588. Spanish Armada defeated and scattered by English defenders. Dispersed by English fireships and driven by adverse winds, the invincible Spanish Armada scattered. The Battle of Gravelines ended with a stunning English victory and a humiliating Spanish defeat. After midnight, the sea battle between Spain and England raged for 7 days. The Spanish ships included wares of torture in their holds. Racks, pulleys, thumbscrews, iron virgins, and iron gridirons waited on the ships. With them, Jesuit priests stood ready to inflict God's punishment on the heretics of England. As the Spanish fleet anchored off Calais, the wind shifted in favor of the English. As the clocks in England ticked past midnight, flaming ships of fire advanced out of the night. The winds drove them straight towards the Spanish formation. Fire ships. During the era of wooden ships, one favorite weapon was the fire ship. The ships used for this were generally old, worn-out vessels that were close to the end of their service. Sometimes cheaply built ships were constructed expressly for this purpose. It was common practice to load these ships with combustible items. Then the defenders would either steer or allow favorable winds to drive them into the midst of the enemy fleet to set its ships on fire. The English sent 8 fire ships in the middle of the Spanish Armada. The Spanish panicked and dispersed, breaking formation. New tactics. The English had captured some Spanish ships and learned from them. They knew that Spanish sailors had difficulty reloading the cannons after firing them. The English would approach close to a Spanish ships, keeping just out of range of the powerful cannon. This provoked the Spaniards to fire. The English would then use the forced delay to their advantage. With the Spanish guns reloading, the English would close in. At close range, they could unload a devastating volley, then retreat. Favorable winds. The wind cooperated with the English by driving the Armada ship into the shallow water off Gravelines. The Spanish port was in the Netherlands, close to its border with France. The shallow water limited their maneuverability. The English ships already had an advantage with their smaller, more maneuverable ships. The fighting began to take a toll on the Spanish ships. By late afternoon, both fleets ran out of ammunition. The English began loading chains and anything else that they could cram in a cannon barrel. They continued inflicting damage on the Spanish fleet. After losing 5 ships and having many more severely damaged, the Armada broke formation and fled. The Battle of Gravelines was over. After the battle, the Spanish did manage to regroup, but strong southwest winds drove them north and into the smaller, nimbler English ships in close pursuit. Stop. After the battle, the Spanish did manage to regroup, but strong southwest winds drove them north with the smaller, nimbler English ships in close pursuit. The Armada fled north into the English Channel. Then severe North Atlantic storms finished the English fleet's work. The stormy seas and fierce winds wrecked many of the Spanish ships on the coast of Scotland and Ireland. The Spanish had lost over 2,000 dead and many more wounded during the fighting. The English had lost around 50. The 130-ship Armada had lost over a third of its vessels. It was a humiliating defeat for Philip II of Spain. The invigorating victory infused confidence in what had been a small, weak English nation. The defeat of the Armada left England with the means and confidence to rise to become a powerful world power. It would use that power to establish its colonies in the New World. December the 20th, 1606. English colonists sail from London to found Jamestown. On December the 20th, 1606, 3 ships departed England, bound for North America. The 3 wooden ships were the Susan Constant, the Godspeed, and the Discovery. The ships, the 120-ton Susan Constant, also has references that it was really the Sarah Constant. Historians are sure of which the proper name is. At 116 feet long, she was the largest of the 3 ships, and she carried 71 of the 104 colonists. At 50 tons, the Godspeed carried 33 passengers and 13 crewmen. She would have been about 68 feet long. The 20-ton Discovery carried no passengers. Her purpose was to carry some of the cargo and navigate the shallower rivers after the colonists arrived. Replicas of all 3 ships reside at the Jamestown National Historic Site in Virginia. The voyage, the passage from England to the Virginia shores, took 144 days, an unusually long voyage. The ship spent 6 weeks lolling in the English Channel as they waited for favorable winds that would blow them south. They arrived at Cape Henry on April the 26th, 1607. May the 14th, 1607. English colonists land near James River in Virginia. Their initial landing on April 26th accomplished, the English colonists searched for a site to settle. If successful, they would be the first permanent English settlement in North America. At length, the president they chose to lead them, Captain Edward Maria Wingfield, decided on the spot. It was a marshy spit of land on the north shore of the James River. They arrived on the site on May 13, 1607, and went ashore on May 14th. Captain Edward Maria Wingfield, 1550 through 1631. Born to Thomas Maria Wingfield and Margaret Kay near Stoneleigh Priory, England, Edward Wingfield entered military service early in life. Taken a prisoner of war in the Protestant Dutch Republic's war against Spanish Catholics, he gained his release in 1589. After a brief retirement and then a stint in Parliament, he returned to military service, fighting next in Ireland. Once again, he retired from the military. At the invitation of his cousin, Bartholomew Gosnold, he joined the New Virginia Company. The company was just beginning to organize its colonization efforts in the New World. Through his efforts, about 40 of the original settlers joined the expedition. At the conclusion of the voyage, the settlers chose him to serve as president for 1 year. The site. The Virginia Company leaders had given them some specific qualities that they wanted in a colony. It had to have deep water access for large ships to anchor. Because the Spanish were active in the area, the site had to be hard for patrolling Spanish ships to see from the sea. It needed to be upstream far enough that the colonists would be alerted to them before any attack. The site he chose proved to be a good choice in one respect, but bad in many others. The local Amerindian tribes did not use the site, deeming it too poor to raise crops. Thus, an English settlement there posed no immediate threat to them, and they largely left it alone. It also had bad qualities. It was low, marshy ground, well stocked with disease-carrying mosquitoes. There was a serious shortage of fresh water. The early settlers drank water poisoned by salt, causing many deaths due to salt poisoning. Many historians feel the first quality balanced out the other two. If they had chosen a spot used by the local tribes, they may have attacked them and wiped them out. Jamestown. After they chose the site, they began clearing land and building structures. They called it Jamestown in honor of King James I of England. April 26, 1607. First British to establish an American colony land at Cape Henry, Virginia. On December the 20th, 1606, 3 ships departed England, bound for North America. The 3 wooden ships were the Susan Constant, the Godspeed, and the Discovery. On April 26, 1607, they dropped anchor in the early morning hours. Several of the 102 passengers boarded a small boat and rowed towards land. As the boat landed, the men emerged from the boat and stepped ashore. Thus began the first permanent British occupation of North America. First election in the New World English colonies. The first act of the new colonists was for the Reverend Robert Hunt to lead them in prayer for the safe passage across the sea. Then an exploring party ventured forth to explore the area. In the afternoon, the party encountered an Amerindian band. A skirmish ensued in which 2 of the colonists received wounds. After the fight, the men returned to the beach. There they opened a wooden box that they had carried from England. The box contained the names of the men that would form the governing council. The document inside named the 7 men that would serve as the council, but there was no mention of a leader. The men then held the first vote under English common law. They chose Edward Maria Wingfield to serve as president for a 1-year term. The Virginia Company had chosen Newport to serve as commander until the colonists went ashore. The men explored the area for several days before moving on to delve deeper into Chesapeake Bay. Cape Henry. The name takes its name from the eldest son of King James I, Henry Frederick, Prince of Wales. It is on the southern bank of the Chesapeake Bay. Virginia has established a state park on the site commemorating the first landing. The 2,888-acre park has camping, cabins, picnic, a beach, and hiking. For information, contact Jamestown National Historic Site, 1368 Colonial Parkway, Jamestown, Virginia 23081. On the web, www.historicjamestown.org. Jamestown is spelled with an E on the end of it. That is JAMESTOWNE.org. Phone number 757-856-1250. On the web, www.historicjamestowne.org. That's historicjamestown.org. Also contact First Landing State Park, 2500 Shore Drive, Virginia Beach, Virginia 23451. Phone number 757-412-2300. On the web, www.dcr.virginia.gov/state-parks/first-landing.html. May 23, 1609. Second Virginia Charter includes region that became Indiana. The King had issued the first Virginia Charter on April 10, 1606, to the Virginia Company. The Second Virginia Charter changed a few of the administrative details of the first charter. The major change was the expansion of territory included that the Virginia Company controlled. Virginia Company of London, London Company. The purpose of the Virginia Company, as stated by the King, was to propagate the Christian religion. The charter stated the settlers were to engage in, quote, in propagating of Christian religion to such people as yet live in darkness and miserable ignorance of the true knowledge and worship of God, and may in time bring the infidels and savages living in those parts to human civility and to a settled and quiet government. The First Virginia Charter. The first charter to the Virginia Company by King James granted the company all lands which are not now actually possessed by any Christian prince or people, a sizable chunk of property that lay between 45 degrees latitude and 30 degrees latitude and extending 100 miles inland. The charter extended all the rights of Englishmen to the settlers of these lands. It gave them the normal protections that a British citizen enjoyed. The king retained ownership of the land. The shareholders and the king would share the profits of any venture. The charter provided a governing council in England with a member of it living in the new colonies. There were two branches of the company, a Virginia branch and a Plymouth branch. The Virginia branch received a charter to establish the colonies in the Chesapeake area. The Plymouth branch obtained the New England area. The Second Virginia Charter. The Second Virginia Charter expanded the area of control. The old charter had limited the inland penetration to 100 miles from the coastline. The second charter extended the region from the Atlantic coast to the Pacific coast, an area that would include latter Northwest Territory and the states of Ohio, Indiana, Wisconsin, Illinois, and Minnesota. The charter also included virtually all of what later became the continental United States. This was instrumental later when Virginia granted George Rogers Clark the area that would become Clark County in the state of Indiana in 1781. Virginia finally gave up this claim on March 1, 1784, in order to satisfy Maryland's demand before it ratified the Articles of Confederation. July 30, 1619, Virginia Company formed the first elective colonial governing body. The concept of representative government in the United States is rooted at the beginnings of colonization. Limited monarchy. The representative government tradition runs deeper in the English-settled regions of North America than in the French and Spanish regions. That stems from the type of monarchies that ruled the colonizing nations that controlled those regions. Both France and Spain had unlimited, absolute monarchies. All political power rested in the king or queen. In England, a limited monarchy existed since the times of the Magna Carta in 1215 A.D. This concept of elected government rooted firmly in the colonial soil, formed to encourage settlement. The Virginia Company was a private enterprise that owned a charter to colonize the area known as Virginia. The king had granted the company the charter, and the company ruled the colony through an appointed council. The company needed to encourage skilled craftsmen and others with valuable skills to immigrate to the New World. To encourage settlement, the company drew up a charter. This charter endowed each colonist that paid their own way to the colony with 50 acres. They also established a House of Burgesses and bestowed the right to vote for representatives to this house on landowners over 21 years old. Thus, colonists not only had title to land upon arrival, but a voice in the government of the colony as well. Unicameral House. The House of Burgesses was a unicameral, or one-chamber, body. It met in conjunction with the governor of the colony and his council. The governor could veto its legislation if he wanted. The Virginia Company had ultimate control over both the governor and the House, but through their representatives, the landowner could make their voices heard. The first meeting was in Jamestown Church and lasted 6 days. There were 22 representatives. The House accomplished little at this session as a malaria outbreak cut it short. It was important, though, as it established a tradition of elected assemblies. After the Virginia Company formed the House of Burgesses, the other companies demanded their own assemblies when they formed. By 1776, 157 years later, the colonies were well versed in elected self-government. They were ready for the next step. August the 15th, 1620, the Mayflower set sail from England with 102 pilgrims. The Pilgrims arrived in Southampton on the Speedwell from their refuge in Leyden, Holland. In Southampton, they were to rendezvous with the Mayflower and some other settlers. The Pilgrims planned to sail to the New World on the 2 ships. The 2 ships departed Southampton, England, around August the 5th. The Speedwell created the first of what would be many problems by springing a leak. The ships put in at Dartmouth to repair the ship. Speedwell. By 1620, the Speedwell was 43 years old. It was a ship called a full-rigged pinnace and was a smaller ship than the Mayflower. The Speedwell was about 60 tons and would have carried around 10 guns. The ship's construction in 1577 was in response to the threat of a war with Spain. Her name at the time of construction was Swiftshore. The ship saw service against the Spanish Armada in 1588. Then it served as Sir Gellie Mayrick's ship during Earl of Essex Azores expedition in 1596. When the Spanish threat ended in 1605, the Swiftshore was decommissioned. The Pilgrims purchased the Swiftshore in 1620 and renamed it Speedwell. They refitted the ship in Leyden, Holland before departure with 2 new masts. Shipbuilding experts theorize that the crew used too big a mast for the ship, and that caused the ship's problems. After the Pilgrims abandoned the ship, the owner refitted it and sent it on for several profitable voyages afterwards. Mayflower. Because of the name's popularity, historians know little about her early history. There were over 20 ships registered with that name during that period. She likely saw her maiden voyage before 1609 and was near the end of its useful life by the time the Pilgrims departed from the New World on her. Historians know little about her construction and layout. They can surmise that she was about 102 feet long with a beam of about 25 feet and drew about 18 feet of water. She was a cargo ship with a capacity of about 180 tons. She was square-rigged and had 3 masts and 3 main levels. These levels were the main deck, the gun deck, and the cargo hold. There was also a poop deck formed by the roof of the cabin in the rear of the ship. The poop cabin resided on the poop deck and provided the crew with an observation area during the voyage. Her construction would have made her passage against the westerlies difficult. This played a key role in the length of the voyage across the ocean. Most likely the ship had transported casks of wine and carried about 10 cannon as protection against piracy. The cargo holds would have stored the tools, clothing, bedding, food, and weapons. The settlers would need these essential items in their new home. The cargo hold did not have windows to prevent water seeping in and ruining the cargo. The holds had low ceilings and were dark, cold, and damp. Cramped quarters. The captain of the ship had the best quarters in the rear of the ship, the driest part. The crew, about 30, lived in the forecastle at the front of the ship. Since it was at the front, the forecastle was the wettest and the coldest, as the waves constantly beat against it. The Pilgrims would have slept in the poop house and gun deck, with some possibly sleeping in the hold. There was no latrine, so people mostly did their business in a bucket secured by ropes or over the side of the ship. Departure and return. The ships departed Dartmouth on August 15, 1620. They did not get far. The Speedwell developed more problems with leaks. After traveling between 200 to 300 miles out to sea, the ships turned around and sailed back to England. Now they had to decide whether to go on or go back to their homes. November the 11th, 1620. Mayflower Compact signed. The stormy passage had caused the Mayflower to reach the New World well south of their intended target of the Hudson Valley. Continued storms prevented them from reaching their destination, which is present-day Provincetown Harbor in Massachusetts. With supplies running low and the season much later than originally intended, they decided to settle their colony there instead of trying to go to their original destination. Outside the charter, a new problem arose to vex the leader of the colony, William Bradford. The group contained some settlers that were not part of the Pilgrim sect. Since their location was outside the charter that governed them, many of these colonists felt that they owed no one allegiance and they could do as they pleased. This was a dangerous situation for the colonists to have as they faced a hostile New World. In an attempt to solve the problem, Bradford drew up a document that became the first framework of government established in the New World. The Mayflower Compact established a government based on majority rule in which the allegiance of the king was assumed. Women and children were exempted from voting. By signing the document, the settlers agreed to follow the rules it established. To assure survival of the colony. The document remained in effect until they received a new patent in 1621. Original document lost. The original Mayflower Compact has been lost to the mist of time, but there are 3 copies in existence. The earliest is Edward Winslow's Mort's Relation, published in 1622. The booklet contains a detailed account of the settlers' first months at New Plymouth. This copy was reprinted in 1625 as Purchas His Pilgrims. William Bradford wrote a copy of what he included in his journal of Plymouth Plantation in 1646. These 3 are the only copies in existence today, and Bradford's handwritten copy rests in a vault at the State Library of Massachusetts. November 20th, 1620. Birth of the first English child in New England. Peregrine White, the first English child born in New England, entered the world while the Mayflower lay at anchor off Cape Cod, Massachusetts. 2 children born on the Mayflower. Pilgrim women gave birth to 2 children on board the Mayflower. The first, Oceanus Hopkins, was born during the voyage. His parents, Stephen Hopkins and his wife Elizabeth, named him Oceanus because he was born on the ocean. Peregrine's parents, William White and wife Susanna, named him Peregrine because he came into the world during the peregrination or journey. The word peregrinus means pilgrim in Latin. Naming children for important events was common in the 17th century. Peregrine White, circa late November 1620 through July the 20th, 1704. The birth date of Peregrine is uncertain. Some places birth on November the 20th, others November 19th. Other sources simply listed as late November 1620. The 20th is the most commonly given date, so the author has used it. Peregrine's father died during the first winter on February the 21st, 1621. His mother later married Edward Winslow and had 5 more children with him. White settled in Marshfield and became a freeman in 1644. He served as an assessor and deputy to a general court in 1659 and in 1673. During his lifetime, he held many other offices in the colony. Oceanus Hopkins died sometime before the Pilgrims left the ship in late December. Pilgrims assigned house lots to 19 family groups. After leaving the Provincetown area, the Mayflower arrived in Plymouth Harbor on December the 16th, 1630. For 3 days they explored the area, searching for a suitable site to establish their colony. They decided on 2 hills, Fort Hill and Coles Hill. Native tribes had cleared much of this already so they could raise their crops. Building the settlement. Harsh weather delayed construction. The first landing party did not come ashore until December the 20th. Legend has it at Plymouth Rock. They parceled out lots about 50 feet deep. Family size determined the lot's width. They received 8 feet of width for each family member. The settlers had to build their own cabin and supply worked on the common houses, forts, fences, and storage houses. They built the settlement on Coles Hill. Fort Hill would contain the cannon they would use to defend the town. While building the structures, the colonists continued to live on the ship, leaving a permanent presence of about 20 men ashore to defend their work against native depredation. Inclement weather, sickness among the colonists, and a shortage of tools and supplies only allowed them to build 4 common houses and 7 cabins that first winter. They had planned to build 19. Provisioning and defense. The colonists finally were able to begin bringing provisions from the ship to the colony by the end of January. During this time, they had some encounters with the natives, adding to their apprehension. By the end of February, they had appointed Miles Standish commander and organized themselves into military companies. They had installed several cannon on Fort Hill. By March, they had formed the structure of the colony and elected John Carver governor to replace Christopher Martin, who had died in January. Death and disease. During this first winter, the colonists underwent many hardships. Most had lived on the ship as there were not sufficient shelters or provisions ashore. Diseases like scurvy took their toll. Many of the men were incapacitated by disease, and 45 of the 102 colonists died. However, the remainder persisted, and the colony grew. The next episode covers the first recorded exploration of the region we now call Indiana by French explorer René Robert Cavelier LaSalle. Find out more about Indiana history by purchasing the book Indiana's Timeless Tales, Prehistory to 1781. The book includes the early history of Indiana from the time the glaciers melted until the final days of the Revolutionary War. The book includes sketches of the native tribes that inhabited the state, as well as the French outpost established during colonial times. You can find it on my website. mossyfeetbooks.com, on the Indiana Timeless Tales section. Just scroll down and find that category and click on it, and you'll find links to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Google Play, and other online booksellers. You may choose to purchase the book in ebook or softbound versions. An audiobook version is available on Google Play. Residents of southeastern Indiana can find my books at the Walnut Street Variety Shop on George Street in Batesville, Indiana. At the conclusion of this series, I will compile the episodes into an audiobook. The audiobook will be available on Audible, Amazon, Apple, Barnes & Noble, as well as many other audiobook sellers. You can also order these books direct from me, the author, on the webpage. If you wish me to sign the book, just send me an email to mossyfeetbooks@gmail.com requesting a signed book and instructions on how you want me to address it. Note, if you send me an email, I will add you to my contact list. Readers on the list will receive an email from me announcing when I publish a new book. If you do not want me to add you to the list, tell me and I will not add you. Listeners to this podcast that want email notification of my new releases can just send me an email requesting addition to the list. You can choose to have your name removed at any time. If you browse the website, you will find dozens of sample chapters, one for each of my books. I hope you enjoyed this podcast, and thank you for listening.